Hi there, welcome back. This is the second video on this project. This is the Grundig Satellit 2100 or Satellite 2100, and I'm going to go into a bit of depth on probably unusual parts of this, namely the taking it apart, because I often go on the net or YouTube specifically to look for ways of opening these things up, because you can run into a few problems, and I found nothing. So this might help somebody else and also serve as a reference to me. Now this thing comes off very easily actually. There are 3 screws at the top here. These are the sort of longish ones. Then there are a few more at the bottom. And the first thing you do is you take off that plate, and that means just pushing that in there and then pushing the plate that way. And then you have another 4 screws, smaller ones, on here, and there's 2 underneath there. So you just push that in there. This thing comes out. Bit dirty, as expected. And then we have 2 more screws underneath here. These screws are in perfect condition. And then, let's see. Yep, the whole thing just comes off. Brilliant. That was easy. It actually looks pretty clean in here. Looks very clean in here. And I don't see any evidence of prior tampering. I may be wrong. There's a hefty speaker on there. Very, very large. 2 fuses on here. Now I would imagine that would be battery. Oh, that's the battery. That's the battery versus mains switch selector. A lot of dirt, but that's because of that opening where you're supposed to put the cable. Voltage selector set to 220 with a fuse. Not much else. Now, what is that? Oh, that's the tuning condenser. Well, I'm going to have to figure out how to delve deeper into this. And I guess I'll report it as I go along. I think that's the input to the amplifier there. That's the external input. Tape versus tape deck. Phono or tape deck. That'll be useful for us to test the power amplifier and power stage. So that's what it looks like inside. It looks pretty neat. Now there are, as usual, quite a few things you have to dismantle to get this thing out. And that board on there, that's a board with a heat sink, I think. I'm just thinking out loud here. That would be the power supply and the, there must be a transformer here somewhere, and the power amplifier stage. There's a transistor or something there. Those trimmers would probably be to set the idle current, I would imagine. I'll have to see the instructions. So there are access points on there. I'm going to do the usual thing. I'm going to start with the power supply and then the power amplifier stage, and take it from there. And I would imagine the crackly volume pot is on this column over here, as are the tone controls. So I've got to find a way of dismantling this thing without causing more damage. But at least it looks pretty neat. It looks pretty clean. You can see the Those connectors there, that's the drum where you tune for or select the shortwave bands. Yep, and you can see quite a bit of dirt on those guys. So that'll need cleaning, but that's not the problem with this part of the radio. The problem with this part is that the tuning condenser or the tuning is jammed up. Now I don't know if this uses a separate tuning condenser to the main one or whether it has its own one. So the jamming could simply be the dial cord and the actual, I'm not sure what it is, something down here. I'll take this one step at a time. Let's see if I can get the power amp out of here. Well, this is a bit of a surprise because I took out these two screws, one on this end and one on that end, and this whole thing just comes out. And we have more access. So that was pretty easy. Now this is all mechanical. And I've also taken out two screws, one from here. It's this little guy over here. And a similar screw out of the bottom down, where was it? Down there. But this thing is still not moving. Oh, everything is moving. Hang on. Maybe the whole thing comes out. This whole thing is moving. I think the whole thing's got to come out. I've also removed the knobs. You just pull them out. And I would imagine the same will apply to the others. So I'm going to do that. So, just a further reporting. Remove that screw. Remove that screw. There's a screw down here which comes out as well. Then you've got to remove that selector there, and that's, you need to unscrew that, and that should just come out, and it does. I think there may be a couple over there with the antenna as well. Let me look at that. I removed these two screws from that antenna bracket, and it looks like the whole thing comes loose. Let's see where that gets us. That little orange connector needs to be removed from there. So I'll do that. That's obviously the antenna connector. And then see if the whole thing comes out. Well, as I thought, the entire antenna just slips over backwards over here. Here it is. Well, that was a lot easier than I thought. Those two screws that held the antenna allowed that whole side to come out. And then here, I just had to slide it out with great care because the wires to the speaker are over there. There's two sets of wires, which leads me to think there's a tweeter inside that main speaker there somewhere. So I need to desolder the wires from the speakers, and I think the whole thing is free. And we can start working on it. Well, opening this up has proven a lot simpler than I thought. And I found the usual amounts of dust and fluff and everything else inside, which I've started to clean off. And I'm going to do what I usually do with these, not these, but with any radio, and that is I start on the power supply, move on to the amplifier, the power amplifier, and then I go backwards. Now, in this particular case, the power supply, this thing works on 9 volts to 16 volts DC input over here, but it also has mains input, and that mains input is a transformer which is under here. You can actually see it from the bottom, but all it does is it comes in through that first board with a mains level voltage selector switch, which I cleaned up. I replaced the cable, the electrical cord, because the one that was on there had some repair done on it. Not very well done either. Put it all back and cleaning everything as I go along, which is something I usually try to do so that you sort of get to the end and it's all being cleaned up. This isn't too bad. This is mostly just a bit of dust. And then I removed the amp board from the side here. And that comes off quite easily. It's just 4 screws over here. You actually have to desolder these 3 contact points at the bottom, which are the battery connectors to the bottom of the board over here. And everything else, all the power management is done on this section of the board. Now, I haven't checked the schematic yet, which I do have, but it seems that the DC 16 volts comes in here. It mixes with the AC that's come in, gets rectified with that bridge rectifier over here. There's some filtering going on. There's actually a transistor which allows you, it acts as a voltage regulator. So you can actually set the voltage. I believe that trimmer is to adjust the voltage. I'll go into more detail when I look at this schematic for this section of the board. But it then goes off to the switching. At the back here, there's a switch here that says DC or mains, and that allows you to select between the two. I've got a schematic for the 2100. What they tell me in the write-up is that the 2100 is exactly the same as the 2000, with the exception of the audio section. Now, this board over here has got both of the functions that I need to look at. It has the power supply and regulation and control over here, but it also has the power amplifier stage. And I believe it's got, yes it does, it has the preamp stage as well. Now this is something which the 2100 has, which is something the 2000 does not. And that is, it has a preamp stage which allows you to have more control on the audio that's coming out of here. They describe it as having impedance matching and also as having some better control on the filtering that goes on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this board, check that everything is working well. There are quite a few electrolytic capacitors over here, and some of them are known culprits, like these brownies over here, that one there. I'm actually going to change all the electrolytic caps because this is one of the most important sections, the audio section, and I want to make sure that's working well. So I'm going to actually revamp this entire board, clean up the pots. This volume pot was particularly scratchy, really scratchy. And I'll follow it from there. I'll see what I need to do. I don't really need to go into as much depth on this, I don't think, as I do on the tube radios, because this thing is basically working. I need to improve the reception. And obviously things like switches need cleaning, because we know from the switches we saw at the top there, they were really, really missing out and scratchy and everything else. So that's what I'm going to do next. We'll then be able to test it by feeding a signal into the phono input at the back there and be able to see the results on the scope. Now this does have a treble, a high frequency output. It has the normal speaker and it has a high frequency output. And what they tell you in that description of the 2100 is that on AM radio, when you select AM, any of the AMs, that treble tweeter, the tweeter, is switched off. Probably because you don't get frequencies going that high. And then on FM and on phono input, or disk input they call it, the tweeter is activated. And then you can deactivate it by clicking one of those buttons at the top there, which I wasn't sure. I thought it was for external speaker. It's not. It's actually to deactivate the tweeter if you want to, when you have FM or phono input. So, next project. This whole board, and the next time we'll see it, it'll probably be totally done unless I find something else that's interesting on here. Well, that board is done. I replaced quite a few caps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 capacitors. That is all the electrolytics. I've replaced them with good quality caps. I've cleaned that board. These pots have all been cleaned with contact cleaner, the top one as well. And I've lubricated the shaft a little bit just to get rid of any friction that there may be in there. All the other components seem to be okay. I've checked a few resistors, they seem to be fine. This particular schematic differs somewhat from the 2000 one because it has a filter and more of a preamp than the 2000 model. So this is not exactly the same as the schematic that I have here. And the 2100 schematic that I have is very, very poor. But what I've done is I had it playing on FM as I change these things. So every couple of capacitors I'd switch it back on and make sure it was working, and it is working. So I'm now going to just put it back and we'll be able to do an audio test with that phono input. Time to test this guy. I've got the signal generator producing a 100 millivolts RMS output at 1 kilohertz. It's coming out here. It's going into the phono input at the back. The speaker out is going into the dummy load. Speaker, it's on dummy, 4 ohms. I think that's a 4 ohm speaker, not quite sure. Leave it at 8 ohms. I've got the oscilloscope channel 1 measuring that channel, and we'll switch it on. I've got pickup selected over here. You can see something already. Okay, that's working. I've got it on dummy so we don't hear the noise. So what have we got here? Nice sine wave. I'm going to increase the amplitude to 200 millivolts RMS. Still a nice sine wave. 300. Still a nice sine wave. 400. Whoops, that's starting. That was 500. Let me drop the volume a little bit. And that seems to be where we get clipping. 3.6 volts RMS. If I go higher, it starts clipping at the top and the bottom, which is good. It starts at the top first, and then the bottom. But maybe it's got to do with the 8 ohm load. Let me put it on 4 ohm, see where it goes. It's about the same. So 8 ohm load, a bit higher. There's our no clipping level. What is it? 3.6 volts RMS. Can't work out on my head what that is, but it's very, very nice sine wave. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the frequency to, say, 4 kilohertz. Drop that a little bit. And we'll try the treble control. First of all, the bass, slight difference there. Not much, but the treble, yeah, there you see. I'm just turning the treble. That's on max. That's on minimum. That is quite a range. That's on 4 kilohertz. Leave that on max. Let's try the bass control. Let's try 200 hertz. Bass maximum, bass minimum. That's where our effect is on the lower frequencies. Let's try 100 hertz. Minimum, maximum. That is quite a range. So our amplifier is working perfectly, which is great. Got the amplifier back in here. All these controls have been cleaned. Everything inside here has been cleaned. So I'm ready now to move on. But this was for me the most important part, because when you're dealing with a radio like this, it's actually got a nice hefty speaker, it's always important to start at the end, and the end is really the power supply. Once you've established that your power supply is fine, then you've got to start looking back from the end, which is the power amp stage, the preamp stage. So we know the power amp's working, we know the preamp and the tone controls are working. And of course we had reception anyway. So I've got quite a bit more work to do on here. I'm going to, I think the next stage will be cleaning switches, make sure the switches are fine. I've got to tackle that shortwave 3 to 10, which is not tuning at all. and I have a burnt lamp down here. I know that because when I put on FM, that lamp doesn't go on. And there's a lot of stuff to do, and I'm not sure how far I'm going to go on aligning. I've got some instructions, but I'll leave that for the next video. So I want to thank you for sticking along with this project, if you are. And if you like the video, please click like. It helps with the YouTube algorithm. And you can share the video on social media. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. I noticed from the views that a big proportion of my viewership is not from subscribed viewers. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. And if you want to support the channel directly, you can do so on Patreon. Thanks for watching. Bye for now and stay safe.